Good day, everyone. Welcome to Fasken's 2022 mining series. This is the 12th year that we've been doing this. I'm Michael Barassa. I'm in the Global Mining Group in the Toronto office. Today's session is the 10th of 15 sessions that we're doing this year. You'll notice on the screen there should be a slide which has some housekeeping items relating to doing a survey and so forth after this is over, so I invite you to read that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mmaphuti Morolong. She's my colleague in the Johannesburg office. She's going to introduce today's panel, which is on transition from brown to green energy in South Africa and how that affects the mining industry. So welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Good day, everyone. As Michael mentioned, I am Mmaphuti Morolong, a partner in Fasken's Johannesburg office and a member of Fasken's Global Mining Group. I'm joined by 4 panelists in the discussion on the transition from brown to green energy and its impact on the South African mining industry. In no particular order, first up, we have Advocate Thabo Mokoena. He is the Director General of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy in South Africa. He was appointed to serve in this role in the year 2017. Under his leadership, the department has managed to strengthen its regulatory framework, thereby ensuring policy certainty in the mining and energy sectors. Second, we have Sanjeev Mungroo, who is the Energy Finance Principal at Nedbank. Sanjeev has 28 years' experience in the power sector value chain with specialist expertise in thermal and renewable energy power plants across the African continent. He has in-depth knowledge of the South African power utility market, including generation, transmission, and distribution sectors, with strong commercial expertise in negotiating and concluding large-scale turnkey solutions for power projects. Next up, we have Dhesigen Naidoo. Dhesigen is currently a Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Security Studies Africa, and he's the Climate Adaptation Lead to the South African Presidential Climate Commission. Dhesigen has previously served in senior positions in the South African National Government and South African universities, having begun his career as a medical scientist in a specialist children's hospital. He's a counselor of the South African National Advisory Council on Innovation and a fellow of the Mmaphuti Institute for Strategic Reflection. Last, but certainly not least, we have Francois Joubert, and he is a partner in Fasken's Johannesburg office. Francois has more than 20 years of post-admission legal and corporate experience. He's a recognized strategic advisor, providing clients with legal, strategic, and commercial and transactional advisory services in the natural resources, safety and health, land use planning, power, oil and gas, mining, and industrial-related sectors. As indicated, the panel will discuss various issues in relation to the transition from brown to green energy in South Africa, and this will include the status of the transition, the Department of Mineral Resources position and role in the transition, the impact of government's position on foreign direct investment in the mining industry, the effect of the transition on the mining industry, and of course, financial institutions' position in relation to the transition. Please remember to put your questions in the screen below, and I will try my best to share the questions with the panel for a response. My first question is to you, Advocate Mokoena, and we just want to understand, and I will get on later on in the discussion, I will ask for the department's position and role in the transition from brown to green energy. But first up, I'd like to understand, given South Africa's reliance on coal and other fossil fuels, which has then in turn created a carbon-intensive economy, One of the industries that's of course affected by this transition from brown to green energy is the mining industry. And the question we then have is whether brown energy contributors are still relevant in the South African mining industry, and whether there's an end date for our reliance on brown energy contributors. Advocate Mokoena, you are still on mute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a good afternoon here in South Africa. Good morning to you in Canada. Thank you very much. Perhaps it will be prudent that I acknowledge the panel members that are in attendance, maybe for the sake of time, without going through all of you, maybe just to acknowledge the Consul General, who is also part of this very important conversation. I can start by saying that we still have an opportunity that we can still derive from this brown, what you call brown energy or fields. Now, here we're looking at coal in the main, whether should the mining companies be worried that there is going to be a challenge. We are quite optimistic as the department that we have what we call a just energy transition, a document that we are busy consulting with relevant stakeholders on this document. Now, what is coming out, it is evident that as the country, we have an opportunity to derive a value from the brown energy, in a sense that we have an abundance of coal as the country. One point that I want to emphasize is that we're talking of other developed countries, and you can't have unequals competing, and you expect us to be at the same level when these developed countries, they have derived the value from the very same coal, which is now being condemned. Of course, we understand that we are part of the global market, and we have to also to comply with the instruments that we are party to, like the Paris Agreement and so forth. But for us as the country, because we're not going to decommission all the coal-powered power stations tomorrow, we still have a long way to go. And in terms of our policy position, we are very clear that is going to be a systematic process. It must be a real just transition in a true meaning of the just transition without really coming up with abrupt decisions to move away from coal, which is our base load. That is where the opportunity is still available for our mining companies in South Africa. With the current developments that are taking place, you can see that even those that have decommissioned their coal-powered power stations, they are recommissioning them. And it clearly tells you that we need to be alive to the realities of this world, apart, from just being abrupt in our decisions. As you know, you start from a strong position. Now, your strong position, or where you still have a strength, is to build on what you are having. You have coal, which is our base load. Now, if we introduce new technologies, like as we are doing, as the country, we are introducing new technologies. We have the renewable industry. And when you look at that holistically as well, from the RP 2019, you can see that there is a commitment from the side of government because we have given the renewables more megawatts. And so it is part of our commitment as the country. But we also need to look at our nationally determined commitments. Whether are we making a progress? But our developmental agenda is very important, because developing countries are at the risk of having their policies influenced by financial and technological offerings. And so we need to be very careful of those, as much as we welcome such interventions. And in simplest terms, what I'm trying to confirm is that there is still hope, and the miners should not have any really worry about the coal that will be stopped very soon. I think what is also important is to look at mechanisms for funding of the coal projects. But the world can see that it is important that we need to be systematic in whatever that we are doing as we move towards a cleaner coal as well. And we're also saying that there must be an investment by companies in what we call a cleaner coal technologies. You know that we are busy currently in a project through our entity called Council for Geoscience, working together with the World Bank for the carbon capture, storage and utilization. And so these are some of the things that we are looking at on how can we utilize this coal that we are having without just saying that, no, we are a hopeless nation, we are now going to move away from coal, without really putting any measures and mechanisms in place. I think that's how I want to respond to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Advocate Mokoena. I have a follow-up question on that, which I guess is related to the first question. Do you have a ballpark as to how much longer as a nation we will still have brown energy contributors be relevant? And this question will go towards answering or helping with some of the responses later on regarding the call on the finance industry to still invest in brown energy contributors. Is there a ballpark? It might not be set in stone, but a ballpark as to how long we see brown energy contributors still being relevant?
Well, our plan is that by 2030, then we should have moved not more than 69% of what is being contributed by the brown energy. And so even on that one, we still need to be systematic. And so, as you know, that you can see, even for those that have committed, that by now, they would have moved completely out of this brown energy. They are now going back. And so it's a complex issue, and it is determined by the prevailing material conditions at any particular given time, depending on what will be our situation as well as the country. But in terms of the commitment, we have made a commitment of where we want to be by 2030. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Advocate Mokoena. Francois, my next question is for you. The Department of Mineral Resources has, of course, indicated that brown energy is still relevant. And of course, Advocate Mokoena also touched on the Paris Agreement and its relevance in our engagements around the transition from brown to green energy. And he certainly at least undertoned the commitment to the transition. I'm curious to understand what issues have been identified with brown energy, and why is the transition from brown to green energy relevant in South Africa or globally?
Thank you, Mmaphuti. And thank you, Advocate Mokoena. I must say, you've got the difficult job as a regulator and also the custodian of our economy, but also on the environmental management of our resources, as well as the social upliftment of our people. And maybe, Mmaphuti, I can start there, that where you ended your question, and that is, South Africa is not an isolated island. We are part of the international community. We've been part of the international community for a very long time. We're a front runner in many of the legislative frameworks around the world, specifically geared at the very objective of why we need to move from brown to green. And if you break it down a little bit and you look at the commitments from a South African government perspective in terms of multilateral environmental agreements, conventions, we are signatory to almost all, if not all, related to a cleaner and a safe environment. The Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biodiversity, Wetlands, Ramsar, and a myriad desertification. And what we're trying to do is to look at being a good world global citizen. We have committed through signatory and ratification to those conventions. And one of the cornerstones of each convention is to say, now that you have signed it and ratified it, go forth and implement it in your own jurisdiction. Make it work in your own country. And if one just look at that concept, our constitution as the end of all that governs basic human rights in South Africa has a provision that says our people has a right to an environment that is not detrimental to their health and well-being, and that right must be protected through reasonable legislative measures. For instance, the formation of the National Environmental Management, the National Water Act, and each and every other legislative instrument that governs an aspect of sustainable development. And I think this is where the difficulty comes in. What is good for a developed country that had 200 years of industrial development has used the very same resource that is now a swear word is a little bit unjust. And it is a little bit unfair to say you have to immediately change your ways. However, as a South African and being regulated by legislative frameworks, we all need to try and achieve the global goals. Reduction in greenhouse emissions, reduction in air pollution, more reliable, green, affordable supply of energy. And we need to look at that. And we can't say we are absolved from our obligations because we signed and ratified that. We looked at the Paris Agreement and we said, we are going to be one of the players that contributes to a global dispensation of a greener planet. And from a South African perspective, and I'll go into it a little bit later, but we need to then culminate into national, provincial, and local legislative frameworks. What is to be achieved on a global level? South Africa has a three-tier system of government, of course, national, provincial, and local. And the National Department of Environment, Forestry, and Fisheries is the focal point of climate change, because what drives brown to green effectively is climate change. Of course, there's this whole notion, especially from a South African perspective, that we as South Africans actually facing a far bigger threat in terms of water scarcity than the immediate climate change, reaching the global climate change objectives. But our National Department of Environment, as I said, is the climate focal point in terms of climate change and adaptation planning. And then, of course, we have the sector departments that looks at provincial, local, concurrent responsibilities of developing and implementing adaptation strategies and plans, and 3 key climate change adaptation institutional structures in the climate change arena has been brought forward. And that is the recently published climate change bill, as well as the formation of a presidential climate change coordinating commission, the interministerial committee on climate change, and then the provincial forums. And they are all designed to improve both coherence, coordination, as well as implementation of adaptation responses across government sectors. And that culminates in a practical and implementable regime for fellow South Africans. So to summarize your question, yes, we are part of the global scenery. However, our playing field should be regarded as still evolving as a developing country, and is most of the African countries and other developing countries that forms part of, for instance, the BRIC countries. They say they face the same problem, and that is, how do we fast track the global commitments that developed countries have been privy to for many, many more years than us? How do we get onto a level playing field? We do have those strategies in place. We do have policy in place. We do have novice and evolutionary strategy legislative frameworks in place, but it will still take some time.
Thanks so much for that, Francois. I have a follow-up question, and it's in fact two questions for you, although I believe you've already answered one part of the question. The question I have is, should our legislation be more aggressive in encouraging the transition from brown to green? And the second part to that question is, has regulation made it easier for us to transition from brown to green?
On the first instance, should it be stricter? In other words, what you're saying is, should we use the incentive or the stick approach rather than the incentive approach? And we have seen in the past that the stick approach is not always the right approach, especially where you're talking about real impacts on real people's lives. If you go forth and you say no more fossil fuel production and or use, it will have a devastating impact on the South African economy, just in terms of, one example, the coal industry. 80,000 people directly and indirectly involved in that industry. And, you know, with a multiplier effect. So you need to look at something that is understood, one, and two, personally, I think a drive towards informing people, telling them what this is all about, will at this moment in time reap far more benefits than saying, listen, you know, companies within the following years, you will or you must do this and this and this. Remember, South Africa's commitment to the Paris Agreement did not say ever that we will end the use of fossil fuels. It says we are committed to change our current dispensation of a predominantly fossil fuel in this economy towards an economy that is sustainable, however, addressing all three pillars of sustainable development: socio, economic, and environmental. And as such, the introduction of, I would say, environmental instruments such as the Carbon Tax Act, the Climate Change Bill, all of that will assist us in understanding that, yes, regulation is required, but I, for instance, would much rather drive environmental social governance from a private industry perspective that says, you know what, we need to look as a company what we're going to do in terms of our climate change strategy. What is our commitment? What is our responsibility? And not necessarily leave it to government and the planning commissions to do it for us. For that to happen, we need to have some sort of a regulatory baseline introduced over a reasonable time frame, be practical in terms of our objectives as a South African economy under the National Development Goals, and then implement it within a reasonable and equitable time frame.
Thank you so much for that, Francois. My next question goes back to Advocate Mokoena. My question to you is what I alluded to earlier. What is the DMRE's position in relation to the transition? And I believe you've answered a little bit of that in your introductory remarks. But second to that, what role is the DMRE playing in the transition from brown to green energy?
Thank you again. What is our role? We are part of government. We have made a commitment as the department that we need to also to play a role. I mean, I would highlight the point that I raised earlier on without laboring into it extensively. When you look at our IPP office, of course, IPP office is not a renewable office. It's an office that is meant to procure energy for the country. But we continue to support the IPP office, and the IPP office has been doing very well in terms of the procurement of the renewable energy. We are currently rolling out different bid windows, as you are aware. And in the main, when you look at those bid windows, there is a huge chunk that is allocated for the renewable energy. And so that is also part of our commitment to demonstrate that it's not only about presenting papers which they become abstract without any proper action on the ground. In our RP 2019, we have made this commitment. If you look at the RP 2019, where we made a commitment that we also need to consider the just energy transition, which must also be systematic, and it must be commensurate with our developmental agenda. And so all these issues, they come from the document that we have been canvassing and presenting to various stakeholders. They have made their inputs, and they also have a better appreciation of what we are trying to do as part of our contribution. I think Francois has correctly pointed out that South Africa is not immune. We have entered into these agreements as well. But what is also important added to that is the developmental agenda of our country, and also to take note that this is a developing country. And he also made a very profound statement by highlighting that these developed economies as well, they have used the very same coal that is now being, well, not unfairly so, criticized, of course, because of the dangers that are associated with it. And then we know that coal is quite also dangerous. It is playing a very negative role in terms of the contribution into the environment. But what we are saying is that let us come up with mechanisms that are going to be able to ameliorate the impact which is, of the emissions that are being caused into the environment or emitted into the environment. And so from our side, we are very clear in terms of the process, and we continue to work with all other relevant departments. As he has also correctly pointed out that the focal department here is the environmental, forestry and fisheries. We continue to work together, and we need to determine our way forward as the country for the attainment of our developmental agenda, and that must be in the best interest of our country. As we're also looking at all the funding models that are being presented, but we're saying we need to be very much mindful. All these issues must be clarified to us as the country. Yes, indeed, we are committed to the just energy transition, and that is not just talk. It is also reflected in our policy decisions that we have taken. It is also confirmed by the actions that we have taken as the department. But what is also essential is for us to take note that we can't just abruptly, graduate or move out of coal. We need to be systematic without appearing as if we don't respect the agreements that we have entered into. Otherwise, we're going to have a serious revolution here. People are going to have a serious challenge because of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. Because if you deindustrialize without being aware that you are deindustrializing, because you are talking of the clean energy, which of course we want this clean energy, then you may actually sit with a problem. We currently have a problem based on what is happening in the Eastern Europe, the challenge of petrol, diesel. And so you know that these are the things that are coming up. And so we can't over the challenge that we are having and bring in other challenges as well. That is why it is important that we are systematic. Remember, even when we went to COP26, we have been very firm, and so the minister has been very firm that we support all the initiatives. However, let us not move out of the coal abruptly. But I think there is an influence of developed economies. I think we need to have a frank conversation without any fear that this is creating a problem for us as developing countries, that we are going to be subjected to their pressure. And I mean, we want money, of course, but without any doubt, I mean, we need to defend our economies as well. If we're going to allow that, we're going to be judged very much unfairly by the future generations because we would have sold out. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Mokoena. The message I'm certainly getting from your feedback and from Francois' feedback is we are committed as a country to the transition. However, our aggression towards that transition will not necessarily be the same as that of other countries because we have different factors at play. And there's certainly a strong message around a just transition. And to this point, I'm aware that South Africa recently published the framework for just transition. And to this point, I'm going to bring in Dhesigen and ask you, Dhesigen, that you just share with us what the purpose of the transition framework is, and what its features are, specifically with regard to the brown energy contributors and, of course, the green energy contributors. Dhesigen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We all make that mistake far too often. Just a few reactions to some of the things that have been said thus far, and then I'll talk a little bit about the just transition. I think DG Mokoena makes the case for why South Africa's dependency will need to go on, maybe even a little bit longer than other folk. But I think we need to bring some balance to this discussion. We've just seen the launch of the IPCC Working Group 2 report. It is very, very stark about the current impact of climate change on the world. It's explicit that more than 3.6 billion people in the world today, many in our own country, and certainly many, many more in the region that we live in, have already been very adversely affected by climate change. We also need to respect, in fact, the Secretary General of the UN talked about the report descriptor as an atlas of human suffering, and we cannot ignore this. The second issue is that common and differentiated responsibility that Francois talked about isn't only a global phenomenon. It is also a phenomenon in the neighborhood. And the comparison between South Africa and the neighboring countries around it, and the relative emissions, and the relative impact of climate change. In fact, it's fair to say that the loss and damage discussions are going to be very, very difficult ones. And the third factor that I have to put on the table is that a lot depends on how fast the world as a whole moves, because that would have implications for where South Africa and countries like South Africa see themselves. I mean, if you look at the really ambitious targets of very high emitters in the developing world, like China, like India, they actually are giving us a strong indication of where some of those players are going. And we should not be too far behind, but we'll come back to that just now. The issue of the just transition is a very important one. It is a recognition that the South African economy, by and large, operates on the mineral energy nexus. We can philosophize about it if we want to, but this is the grim reality. It is the core of our economy, it is the core of our financial system. It is a very important mechanism for livelihood for a fair number of people. Of course, it's declining now because of the very high unemployment rates in South Africa. It's also declining because of the fairly inadequate energy security rates in South Africa currently. So the key point I want to make is that we need to move towards the diversification of energy very, very rapidly. This is not the same as giving up on green energy altogether, but the ratio between green energy and brown energy needs to move very rapidly in favor of green energy. But recognizing all of this, the Presidential Climate Commission and Minister Gwedi Mantashe is a member of that commission, is investing in, one, the Just Transition Framework, because the energy transition, the DMRE is taking care of, but there's a much bigger transition that needs to be engaged around the socioeconomic movement. And as we speak, the first of the consultation workshops on that just transition is happening in eMalahleni today. Because the reality is that people are in a particular circumstance. In our quest to move towards clean energy, in our quest to move towards decarbonization, we can't deliver a double whammy, particularly to the poor and vulnerable in those places. So the concept of restorative justice is a very strong prevailing factor in that engagement. And the idea is to develop either a formula or a series of formulas and intervention that organize for those people who are currently highly dependent on the fossil fuel value chain, on the coal value chain in particular, to not be worse off in the future than they are now, that there must be enough transitionary element around it, including things like skills and reorientation and movement to green industries, reorganizing for the most arable agricultural land in South Africa, this is in Mpumalanga, to actually return to agriculture. But in the transition process, also talking about bigger issues like income grants to tide over a particular period of time. So all of those are different elements of this transition framework. And after these series of first level workshops that we're having, and there are 9 planned, we will then sit down again in that commission and start consolidating how this needs to inform both national policy as well as national legislation, because the climate bill has its place in the House this year, and it will become a Climate Act in 2022. So maybe I should pause there for now and then return into the discussion on some of the other points.
Thank you so much for that, Dhesigen. Certainly valuable input insofar as what our viewpoint is in relation to a just transition. And I think an important issue or topic that you touch on is we certainly need to look towards upskilling or ensuring that there's transferability of skills in the transition so that we don't leave the brown energy employees worse off in the transition, which is important. But how realistic or how possible is it to manage that transition? I think especially when and transition specifically in relation to employment, especially when you consider where the brown energy contributors are located and where very likely the green energy contributors are located. How do we manage to bridge that gap? It might be that, and I wonder, is it that we expect or we consider or propose some form of relocation, or we consider or propose reusing the existing skills in a different sphere, but still within the Mpumalanga, Limpopo area, which are likely to be the two most affected areas given the availability of coal in those areas.
That's an important question. And this is where we have to have a very high investment in innovation and new knowledge. Because frankly, we don't know enough right now to have any kind of linear equation to get us in that direction. So there are some very important investments being made. The first of those investments is actually developing out climate resilient development pathways. So we need a very different way around organizing what this trajectory means going into the future. The second is absorbing and appreciating an important nexus between climate change and the 4IR. The whole notion around physical location and residential location, work and residential location, to some degree is a part of our history. I mean, we are already living in a gig economy, and there must be opportunities associated with that we can bank on in a very realistic way. The third issue associated with this is organizing for the right kinds of support mechanisms. So one of the projects that the PCC is currently part of, together with government through National Treasury as well as the World Bank, is engaging different theaters of operation. One of those theaters of operation is in fact cities, and how cities, through city support programs, can in fact become locus of change for all of those issues. Because it isn't just about the transition of energy. And energy is crucially important, of course. I mean, we're having one of the most major conflicts in Europe, I think since the Second World War, on the back of a very big energy question. But it is about a whole range of things that go along with that. And one of the things Francois mentioned earlier was our issue of water scarcity, which is very directly related to climate change. And our responses to this have to be much smarter than they are now. So one of the things that the Climate Bill, when it becomes the Climate Act, insists on is, firstly, it gives the ownership to the line departments in a much more explicit way than we have ever done before. The DFFE, in fact, becomes a coordinating partner in government, as does the PCC under the chair of the president. So each of the sectoral departments will produce sectoral climate change plans and manage those plans in a way that organizes to use the rhythm of a sector, because I think that's something we lose sight of, that when we try to impose something from somewhere else with a completely different rhythm, we then upset the rhythm and it becomes an add-on function to an existing function when you actually want to organize for a transition and an empowerment of what you're already doing, except in a much more superior way. So I think these are the kinds of things that we need to engage. We also have to cotton on to the fact, Chair, that we are sitting in an economy that has far too many employable people without a job. So part of the transition is not only organizing for the currently employed to continue to be employed, part of the transition, if we are going to be successful about it, is the green industry initiatives must be sufficiently robust so that all of those who are currently not employed will in fact become employed.
Thanks for that, Dhesigen. I'd like to, I guess, pause on some of these points for a bit and just bring in Sanjeev and the financial sector's perspective on the transition. Sanjeev, in response to the, I guess, talks about the transition, a few financial institutions, of course, were very quick to share their position around whether or not they would be investing in brown or green energy projects, without, of course, holding them to it. My question for you is, what has the financial industry's response been to the transition? Are we, it's a couple of questions, are we likely to, or is the industry likely to invest more in brown than in green energy projects, especially bearing in mind the feedback from Advocate Mokoena around the relevance of the brown energy industry in the transition to green energy? What's the financial industry's position in relation to this entire process?
Thanks, Mmaphuti. And maybe to start off and in approaching the subject, I think one needs to also look back in terms of, what we have done so far and where we're going in terms of a pipeline. But on the whole, as a country, as a human being, as a financial institution, I think there's no doubt what we need for the country is sustainable, affordable and reliable access to energy. And, with that undertone, we have to then look at the fundamentals in our power sector, right? Acknowledging firstly that from an energy perspective, we're one of the largest contributors of, greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lack of adequate generation capacity to meet the demand in the country. And at a global level, the need to do this transition, right? And not just because of climate change, but in the country, on the continent, we also, the benefits are widely spread across the socio-economic spectrum for the continent. So having a look at that, then if we look at the global transition technologies or sustainable technologies to green energy transition, has largely 4 pillars, I would say. So if we look at one of it is being your traditional renewable energy sources. So at a global level, looking at hydro, wind and PV, here on the continent, we've seen, mostly wind and PV domination. And then the rather sexy subject of clean and green hydrogen, which is going around at a global level, including in South Africa. The third one being carbon sequestration, which is also vital in the production of what we refer to as blue hydrogen. And then battery energy storage or energy storage, like we've seen in the country, a program that was run by the DMRE, under the risk mitigation program. So in looking at these 4 pillars, I would then draw your attention to the first 2 largely. So your traditional renewable energy sources, which is your wind and PV, where we've seen it put out in a massive scale in the country. This is recognized as the lowest cost decarbonization technology. It also has the benefit of having a massive impact in reducing this global greenhouse gas emissions. And renewable energy sources also going to have a critical role in the production of green hydrogen going forward. Then if we look at the second pillar, which was green hydrogen, that's where the latest and new tech is being involved. But this entire sector, the way we see it, it's going to increase the uptake of renewables in power generation. And the other massive impact it's going to have, it can aid the decarbonization of the more difficult sectors in the country, including that of petrochemicals, iron and steel, no doubt. And in the longer term, the way we see it, it's going to have and could have a massive impact in long-term energy storage that also talks to the point of the intermittent nature of renewable energy. So in terms of what have we done as a country in renewable energy, in this green economy, the DMRE has run, and IPP office has run a phenomenal program, like the Director General has referred to. Since the first REAP program, we've seen this being oversubscribed quite easily 4 or 5 times or even more over, right? And every round that we've run in the country, we've seen sponsors come in, and in every round we see new sponsors coming to the market. And that's certainly clearly healthy for competition in this sector. Renewable energy investments has had the support at all levels in just about all organizations and remains possibly one of the most attractive choices. Now, having said that, there is no doubt that brown energy has a role to play. And in our view, they have sufficient support in terms of funding, albeit sometimes more challenging when you look at particular technologies, example, coal. But there are other brown technologies where the DMRE is pointing towards a big gas program to also come into the country. And I think one needs to look at this entire energy system of the country and look at what is regarded as a balanced approach, in getting what we regard as our optimum energy mix. Now, how does this affect all of the mining industry where the subject is today? In my view, the mining industry with the ability of the licensing for up to 100 megawatts now, for the industrial space, I mean, they are all benefiting from this. All that has been done, because if we look at where we started with renewables in round 1, where not having skills, not knowing how to do it, I mean, all of this has had a massive impact. So the mining industry, no doubt, is benefiting from all of this. And all new potential projects uses the REAP program or the RMIPP as references, not just for tariffs, but for documentation and for the skill sets that's in the country. So I think looking forward from a financing point of view, there's no doubt that the most efficient projects and initiatives, including brown energy, will find the investment that's required.
Thank you so much for that. And would your sentiment be the same then? Because I believe your answer was I guess just linked to financial industry and not necessarily foreign direct investment. Would your sentiments be the same around whether government's position, or as Advocate Mokwena's statement was that the position is that coal is still relevant and it will be relevant for a while? Would the sentiment still be the same, that there shouldn't be any issue with getting foreign direct investment in coal versus investment in green energy?
So I think coal is a challenge, there's no doubt. But I think, like I said, if we look at what has been achieved, what has been done, so far all the programs that's been out there, that's come to market, all have been oversubscribed. So I think if we look at the sponsors that's coming in, that's supporting it, so I think without looking at maybe what specific brown energy we're going to look at, but the program so far has all been oversubscribed. So I use that as a litmus test and say, you know what, going forward, I can see, there's a queue of people willing to do business on the continent, willing to do business in the country, and knowing where we are with the fundamentals of our power system, I think we need to see how that plays out.
Thanks so much, Sanjeev. Just one last follow-up question to you. Should industry or the financial industry be placing more obligations on brown energy contributors to almost force the transition to green energy? Or do you share the sentiment that we just need to keep easing out and perhaps over time impose more obligations on brown energy contributors?
So I think rather than look at it that way, I think what we need to perhaps look at is how has transition perhaps affected funding decisions. And thus far, I think Nedbank and including the other financial institutions, they've all supported the government procurement initiatives in the REAP space, in the RMIPP space. And I think what we certainly need to look at, even if we look at the mining industry, is understanding the client, understanding their process requirements for in terms of energy, and I think any good project will get the funding that it requires. So I think a sensible solution going ahead in terms of being able to deliver what the market actually needs. And let's be very clear that it's also about affordability. And if we look at where renewable and green energy is pricing itself today, I think it's no longer a question of parity pricing with what is out there. It's certainly by far the cheapest if we look at the previous rounds.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Sanjeev. Dhesigen has a reaction to your comments. Dhesigen, I'll bring you in to just share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Mmaphuti. I just want to add to what Sanjeev has put out, and maybe 3 very quick points. One of the things that hasn't hit the discussion yet is South Africa being a mining country with a strong mining tradition doesn't only have to mine coal. We can have a very positive displacement, and in the realm of renewable energy, the new mineral demands are very large, some of which we know very well and have already exploited, like platinum. But there's also the issue of cobalt and copper and aluminium and the rare earth metals and gallium for solar as a smart new solar, which was in fact invented in South Africa in the lab at the University of Johannesburg, and tellurium and germanium and so forth and so on. So there's a really big opportunity here. So when we're looking at this thing, we're not talking about a forced displacement of coal mining, but maybe a transition from coal mining to much higher value mining inside the system. And that's an opportunity that is being explored by a vast number of players, but not in a collective narrative, I think. And that should be something important. The second thing I want to put on the table is that we've gotten some interesting boosts around investments in the green transition, and the Just Energy Transition Transaction, the JET, the $8.5 billion pledged in Glasgow at COP26 is a very encouraging point. Look, how we manage it, we still have to see. The president, as you know, has appointed an envoy specifically to look into that transaction, David Manele, and his team will give us some of the formulas around how to deal with this. And that in turn could become a template with which we can engage many more opportunities inside this domain. The last point I want to put on the table is this one, is the pace at which you do this transition really matters. If you move very quickly, in advance of the general pool, in particular the advanced economies, you could find yourself an outlier with some disastrous results. But there are also huge implications to moving too slowly. And the signals are already out there. The EU green finance taxonomy is already out there. The discussions around CBAM, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, are already out there. And if we don't have the right pace around this, South Africa will not only lose on investment, it could start losing market share in a very, very significant way. So the way we have this discussion, the way we talk about this, and what we do needs a lot of smarts as to how to roll it out. And we shouldn't organize ourselves to have polarity on this debate of coal or no coal, because it is neither. We're always going to have some coal, and hopefully we can get smart enough in the next little while to be able to use the coal for things other than energy. And, we have some track record with high value plastics, for example, coming out of carbon and many other things. I mean, there's a whole graphite industry that is emerging. So we will find those. But I think we've got to have that right kind of balance in the way we engage this discussion going into the future. Thank you.
Whilst my colleague is getting back online, I think I just also want to add on what Sanjeev and Dhesigen has said. I mean, if one looks at the transition from brown to green, and one realizes, and I'm glad Dhesigen said that, we shouldn't polarize ourselves in terms of a coal, no coal, or fossil fuels, no fossil fuels. We should look at the opportunities instead, and most of those opportunities are underlined by green financing responsibility or criteria. And if one look at the whole policy and regulatory evolvement, right from policy to decision making in terms of green finance, and you start looking at projects, remember, if you look at what the climate change bill wants to achieve, it seeks to enable development of an effective climate change response and long-term transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy and society for South Africa in the context of sustainable development. So clearly, one needs to read the whole move from fossil fuels to low-carbon in the context of other sustainable development goals. If you look at the Agenda 21 and you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and you look at, for instance, in the finance industry, you're looking at responsible investment principles and insurance principles. All of those are aligned to bring forward a different dispensation than what we have been used to in the last 100 years. And if South Africa, in terms of looking for projects in line with the objectives of the current legislative regimes and the policy regimes, in other words, contributing to efforts to stabilize greenhouse gases or supporting the transition towards a low-carbon economy and giving effect to South Africa's international commitments, whilst we still keep people working, whilst we still building a developing framework in our country. And if you then look at designing and implementing of effective, coherent policies to mobilize green capital at scales within the financial system, the existing system, and looking at commonality, employing a common set of definitions linked, South African understood definitions linked to the just transition policy to enable policy alignment and tracking out of financial flows, but understood by the financial markets, understood by the very people that apply for funding, that we are no longer as financial institutions, as development financing institutions, as institutional investors, going to invest other people's money into something that will harm us in the long term. And Dhesigen has it right. On the one hand, we've got the system that push and push and push for immediate change. And we just naturally so want to, kick against the chains and say it's too fast. But on the other hand, we do have very real impacts in the South African context, water scarcity. So we do need to look at green financing to guide us more, and utilizing green, for instance, utilizing green and other thematic bonds to mobilize capital for specifically climate and transition related projects, to enable us access to the larger pools of institutional capital at the end, that the world sees our absolute commitment towards becoming a member of global society that wants to also adhere to a better world in future. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is what we want to achieve on the green side. But just to take our discussion a little bit further, Sanjeev, would you say that the transition affected how banks make investment or funding decisions? You have discussed it in a little bit more detail, but what is the finance industry position in relation to normal companies, largely driven by carbon-rich projects? If they come to you and say, look, I can't just close industrial smelter using coal as energy overnight. I need you to help me from a financial perspective in achieving these goals. How would you see your response, or what should be the response of financiers and other investors if this happened? Because this is a very practical and real example that's happening every single day.
Sure. Thanks for that, Francois. So, has it affected our funding decisions? I think the answer is a big yes. Right? And like I said, one needs to, without theorizing on the subject matter, let's look at what's happening, in reality today. With this, I alluded very briefly to it, the self-generation 100 megawatt generation license. It has been received in an unbelievable way in industry, right? The industry has supported it in a massive way and in a very short time, because what we are seeing is not just existing clients approaching the bank. We're getting new to bank clients also looking to do these renewable energy projects. And in these RFPs that we've seen gone to market already and what's out there today, we're seeing quite a mixed approach. We're seeing hybrid solutions, not pure green energy play. Then we're seeing also your traditional wind and PV play, and some with storage and some without storage. Now, this entire transition, if we look at it as a bank as well and who our clients are in terms of sponsors, years back, your sponsors traditionally were just large utility players. And today, with renewable energy, we're seeing many other people entering the sector. And also now, with time, they quickly gain track record, and good track record that we are willing, to fund with. Now, in terms of, again, what we're seeing coming through the bank, the volume of green projects coming through outstrips that of brown energy projects coming through. So obviously they get the attention as well. So the whole transition, in my view, it's the right thing to do. And the economics suggests that green energy is far more affordable. So looking ahead also in terms of where we started with tech, I think, scalability and affordability goes hand in hand. Scalability unlocks affordability, clearly demonstrated in the REAP rounds ran by the DMRE. Again, if we look at the initial questions all about price parity, today, green has been undoubtedly cheaper. On the African continent, we've also seen similar trends. And I think looking ahead, even if we look at green hydrogen, I think that's going to be a very similar story. So has it affected our funding? Yes. And I think if we just look at the volume of projects coming through, what's coming through, there's no doubt it's dominated by funding requirements for green projects. Are there brown energy projects as well? Yes. Do we look at them? Absolutely.
Thanks so much for that, Sanjeev, and thank you, Francois. Do you have a comment on that? And after your comment, I'd like to pass on to Advocate Mokoena for his comment.
Thank you.
Mmaphuti, I don't have. Advocate Mokoena, please proceed. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I thought that because I'm looking at the time, maybe before I lose out in making my last submission, I just want to emphasize this point that we all have a common objective. And that common objective is that we need to make sure that the just energy transition plan or the just transition plan that we are having as the country, and also looking at the nationally determined contributions, we are aligned when it comes to that. That is very important from a policy point of view. I have taken note of the point around that the pace matters. And so that is very important, of course. We all do agree with that. But this must also be commensurate with our developmental goals as well as the country. One colleague of mine was sharing some information, but it is already for public consumption. We know about this, saying that it is from one of the newspapers here, or the media houses, saying that Europe is now returning to South Africa for coal. I do acknowledge the point that has been made, that there are other things that can be used, that coal can be used for. But at the moment, I think we need to have a focused conversation. We are talking of energy, and we're saying that if we're going to move just abruptly from coal to these other new technologies, which may not be able to sustain our economy because coal is giving us a good base load, then that may create a problem for our economy. But we're also mindful of the fact that we have huge PGMs, or PGM minerals deposits, which could find industrial applications on renewable energy technologies as well. I think I'm just trying to highlight a point that has been raised earlier on by one of the speakers, that we're quite very much alive to all these realities. But our point is that we need to have a focused conversation, because the issue at the moment, it is about coal. Now, even though that here we are being polite, you're talking of brown energy. And so, but the issue is, how do we then transition? That is very important. Now, the issue, I think Francois raised a very important question, which I think the financial institutions, they also need to reconsider their position. Because when you look at the socioeconomic challenges that we may be facing as a result of this, especially around the area of Mpumalanga, then we're going to have a very serious challenge there. And so it is important that we have a frank conversation as well with our financial institutions. And so I'm not here to speak on behalf of the mining companies. I'm just raising a principal point that as Francois has actually given a better context to the point or the question, that these are the challenges. We need to have a differentiated approach on how do we deal with our domestic issues, because sometimes, because of some bigger voices coming to bigger players in the global market, we tend to shiver. And so we need to be very firm in our positions as different sectors. And so I think the other point that has been raised in terms of the contribution or contributions that must come from different sectors, or sectoral departments. And so we are playing our role, and we are quite very firm in terms of our submission as the department. And at the end, we need to have a consolidated and uniform approach based on what we have submitted as different departments as part of our contribution towards ensuring that we also make a contribution. And so, but then I think this is a very good conversation, and we'll continue to have this kind of a conversation. But what is more important is a thorough and a frank conversation with our financial institutions, both developmental financial institutions and our banks. Because if we don't do that, we're going to really to drive our country into a serious risk of having to grapple with a challenge of shortage of energy as the country, and also the challenge of unemployment, because the issue of being systematic, it is really a real stuff that we must consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Advocate Mokoena, for those remarks. I see we are almost out of time. So I'm going to pass on to Dhesigen for his comment and closing remarks, and then I'll pass on to the next panelist for their closing remarks. Thank you. Dhesigen?
Thank you, Mmaphuti, and I will be brief. I just want to make 2 points in conclusion. The one point is that a very big part of what we're able to do next actually rests on DG Mokwena's shoulders. That just energy transition that the DMRE is currently working on, and they know that they will have the partnership of the PCC and many, many players in the South African system, is going to be absolutely pivotal around engaging a multiplicity of these issues. The second point related to that is one recognizes absolutely the diversity that also exists even within the coal value chain. There are some major players who have organized for themselves to be able to make a transition quite easily. And there are many junior miners who are going to need a lot of help around this. So other government instruments like incentivizing green industries, incentivizing new initiatives that help us to cement a more sustainable economy is going to be absolute. And my last point is thank you very much to Fasken for giving us a chance to have this discussion. Very grateful indeed.
Thank you, Dhesigen. Sanjeev, quick closing remarks from you, especially in light of the last bit of what Advocate Mokoena has mentioned, but I guess in light of the discussion as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I think as a country, we need to move forward. Is energy transition a thing? Absolutely. Are we supporting it? Yes. And in terms of what we see come through, and as certain financial institutions already have positions on very particular technologies, and no dancing around, but coal has become quite difficult to finance in the power industry. This is not just here, but at a global level. And overall, I think we need to look at the IRP and support the projects and the country going forward.
Thanks, Sanjeev. Francois, 1 minute closing remarks from you.
It's very easy. I think change starts at home. Companies who are serious about the transition need to start to do the small things right. Embed environmental, social, and governance ESG principles in across all your operations. Start investing in skills and enterprise development that will meet the demand of the new industries with workers, women, black ownership, and entities specializing in these the changed industries. Incorporate climate risk and opportunities into your business strategy. Understand what it means. Understand what ESG means. From a policy perspective, maybe setting a science-based emission reduction target that is practical, implementable. Developing of operational plans and work with others to enable the achieving of these targets. My last remark is, if we know what we're dealing with, in other words, if we have the incentive of understanding what we're dealing with in terms of just transitional arrangements, it will go a far way. Thank you, Mmaphuti.
Thank you so much, Francois. This concludes our discussion with the panel. I will now hand over to Thandiwe Fadani, Consul General of South Africa in Toronto, for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Mmaphuti, for this opportunity. To the moderator of the session, Ms. Morolong, who has run this session so well. Thank you very much. To our partners, Fasken, led by Michael Barasa, thank you very much for working with us in conceptualizing this session. The private sector, as represented by our esteemed panelists, Dhesigen Naidoo, Francois Joubert, Sanjeev Mungroo, thank you very much for the insights expressed in your viewpoints in responding to the questions posed to you. To the Director General of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, Advocate Mokoena, thank you for paving the way for the discussion and the valuable information shared today. And to all those who have joined our discussion today, I wish to express my heartfelt thanks for the valuable contribution in the quest for making mining in South Africa globally competitive and economically sustainable. Indeed, DG, all the opportunities that exist must be explored and discussed at length, looking at all angles that can actually minimize the existing challenges or maybe bottlenecks that are faced by this industry at the time of the global uncertainty due to macroeconomic factors. So much has been outlined in the discussions today. As the partners to this webinar, we will continue to engage and update. This was not the last discussion. The organizers will tease out the silent points that came out of today's discussions, and then we can map up the way forward and communicate. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Mefadani. From the discussion today and certainly from your closing remarks, it is clear that there is a lot that is going to go into the transition. There's still room for brown energy, but there's certainly room for green energy, and it's important to accelerate at a reasonable pace, our transition to green energy. But more than anything, it will be important for us to collaborate with one another, both finance and industry and government alike in this transition, because we are all very significant and important role players in the transition from brown to green energy. Thank you to the panel for your invaluable contribution and guidance. We absolutely appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. Our next session in the mining series will be on Indigenous Law Update. It will take place today, beginning at 3:30 p.m. Toronto time. You can all sign up for any of our upcoming webinars at the Fasken Institute section of fasken.com. And we certainly hope that you can join us for our upcoming seminars. Thank you.